is the City of Littleton City Council study session for Tuesday, February 18, 2020. All council members are here. And our first item tonight is going to be under the criminal code updates. And I believe the city attorney or the senior assistant city attorney will be presenting.
Or both.
Or both.
Good evening
And
again.
the purpose tonight, I believe, is just really putting things in alignment with the state laws and update and clarifying, clean up some of the language. And it's going to be on do we do a first and second reading on this eventually?
We will do first and second readings on this. And as you mentioned, yeah, the purpose of this and going through our criminal codes was to do some updates. This has been one of council's continuing goals, and one of their goals last year was to start doing updates to some of these sections of the code that maybe haven't had a lot of attention over the years. So most of the changes that you'll find within these proposed criminal code changes are largely designed to bring up to current alignment with state law. State law changes every once in a while, and we like to kind of align what our city ordinances are to better mirror what the state is saying. Additionally, it adds a few sections to our municipal code. As part of our process in evaluating the city codes and the criminal codes, we had conversations with the judge, Judge Feldman. We had conversations with police command staff, who then talked with their police officers to figure out what it is that we may not be capturing within the municipal court that would be helpful for them. Additionally, Ashley Augustine brings a lot of experience with her former experience as a district attorney for Jefferson County. I started off my municipal law career as a prosecutor, so I like to think that I have maybe some little teeny bit of understanding. But a lot of it, what it does, outside of adding the new changes, some of the new ordinances and cleaning up a few provisions, is really bringing it up to date with state law. So we call it the criminal code, but there are 4 different titles that are affected by this work. We have some administrative business regulations, police regulations, which are really kind of the heart of what the criminal code are, as well as a couple updates to our traffic regulations section. One of the things that we heard is we wanted to adopt the model traffic code for 2020. So that would be part of those traffic regulation updates. And I'm gonna defer a lot to Ashley because she's smarter than I am, and you probably get tired of hearing from me all the time anyways. So some of the updates that are going on with state law, there are 36 sections that we updated, but some of the highlights are as.
All right, I think this is where I take over.
Thank you. On
the last slide, you saw there's almost, I believe, 58 sections of our code that are affected by this. 36 of which, as Reed indicated, are really just trying to align with state law. So broad overview of what that really means. There's much overlap. We did summary tables outlining all 58 sections and what we're changing and why. But the basic ones for state law is the first big one, municipal ordinances that are violated, the possible sentences that can be faced now has changed by 1 day. It used to be 1 year, and now it is 364 days is the maximum possible jail. So there's several places in our code that refer to that 1 year. We're cleaning those up, changing it to the 364 days to align with state statute that came pursuant to a House bill. Theft amount went up. There's a couple tweaks to the theft statute to bring that in line with state law. So we're charging consistently. Let's see what else. There's several sections where our code would refer to a statute in state law, and that statute reference has now been repealed and either replaced in a different place in state law, and so we're going back and making sure we're referring to the right places. You'll notice in a couple of the alcohol and drug related sections, recently in state law, they've included an immunity clause. So there's a lot of language saying it's illegal for underage people, for example, to possess alcohol, marijuana, but they have built in an exception where they don't wanna prohibit people from calling in overdoses to help their friends for fear that they'll get charged because they're in possession of alcohol or drugs. And so that's fairly new in state statute, and we added those into ours to allow that same kind of immunity to encourage reporting of overdoses in the hope of saving some lives potentially. Additionally, and we'll go over these sections more in depth, there were a couple different smoking sections that we're proposing changes to bring in line with the vaping items that we've heard on the news. Our smoking sections, oh, thank you. Our general smoking sections and the definitions under the smoking have proposed changes to include electronic smoking devices or vaping related products in the smoking definition. So that will affect a couple different sections of the code, most notably underage possession of tobacco. Right now, we have that as age 18, and I'll come back to that in just a second.
And I'll just jump in. Previously, the definition of smoking that the city had required actually the burning of something. So the electronic smoking devices that we're familiar with, that wouldn't fit into the definition, so it was always technically allowed, at least under city law.
Correct. And under, we refer here to the Colorado Clean Indoor Air Act. That's where a lot of these changes and definitions that you'll see in the proposed changes are coming from, with a new definition for electronic smoking devices, including all your vaping related products. Same with just smoking in general, what that means, it now includes those electronic smoking devices. And so that's going to affect the general smoking restrictions in our city if adopted, where it would also include the possession of those vaping related devices. Again, as I was saying, the underage, go back.
Sorry.
It's
my hint to move up.
Yeah, no, go back. On the underage possession of tobacco, you'll see at the bottom there, it says raising the age from 18 to 21. To give you a little background on this, recently in December of last year, the president did sign into effect a federal bill that changed the tobacco age from 18 to 21. It is a federal law. Timeline wise, once that was enacted or passed on December 20th, there's 180 days from that date for federal law to enact rules surrounding that and what that's going to look like to effectively change the age. And then another, I believe, 90 days past that for it to officially go into effect, but it is already state law. So we'll see something on the books for federal at the latest September 15th of this year. Colorado State, like Department of Revenue, is already advising tobacco retailers that the age is 21, that they must comply with that. I anticipate Colorado law officially changing and having something on the books soon. There are several cities in Colorado that have already changed it to 21, so we are proposing it here knowing that it will come federally. Obviously, it's completely up to you guys whether you want to do that now or wait until September, but it is already a federal law. I think that covered that one.
And now will be the highlights to some of the additional
You
sections.
guys didn't practice, did you?
No.
What?
Wait, can you tell? Let's see.
We talked, her job was to make me sound smart, so.
Am I doing a good job?
You guys didn't practice, did you?
We are proposing the addition of 9 new sections to the code. 7 of these, from conspiracy to resisting arrest, so sandwiched in the middle, already exist in state law. By putting them into the municipal code, it allows our officers to charge those into municipal court. The very top one, removal of dog waste, and the very bottom one, improper use of 911, are brand new sections that we're proposing and that we wrote, either looking at other cities or other states, how they are wording these type of ordinances. We heard from animal control that he would really like the ability to cite someone for not picking up after their dogs. It also includes a provision that they must pick up after their own dogs on their own property to not become a public nuisance at some point. So that's the feedback behind that one. The improper use of 911, much like it sounds like, we're trying to prohibit harassment of 911, misuse of 911 for false emergencies. You'll see in the language it does build in those scenarios where someone truly believes there is an emergency and they call mistakenly. We're not trying to punish that behavior, but rather the harassment and true misuse of the system and diversion of our resources away from other emergencies. Okay, thank you. Along with adding 9 sections, we are proposing the repeal of 2 sections within the code. The first one being loitering. The reasoning behind that, a lot of these statutes have been struck down in other jurisdictions because they are overly broad or vague, to use constitutional language, and they're infringing on constitutional rights for people to have freedom of speech or freedom of assembly. And really the way ours was written, there was a built-in defense, if you will, where the police would have to ask the person why they were there, try and determine if there was a lawful reason why they were there, and if they were, there really was no violation. And so that type of questioning can still happen. Repealing this code does not disallow our police from contacting anyone that they have suspicions of, that they want to understand why they are where they are. And then if they are doing something that is unlawful, there would be another section of our code, typically probably obstructing taking charge.
There's nothing that prohibits an individual from sitting in the park all day. That's their right to do, obviously within hours of the park. If we had an individual who wanted to just sit on the sidewalk the entire day, we would probably have them move, or they could potentially be charged with obstructing public right of way. So there's other ways to get around this, but the loitering issue, the solicitation issue have been challenged in quite a lot of jurisdictions. And right now, the case law is leaning towards kind of moving away from those types of provisions. You know, if someone was in a particular business, obviously the business owner always has the right to ask someone to leave his premises, and a failure to do so can be charged with trespassing. So there's ways to get around where I think perhaps most people would find an issue with loitering or someone loitering. So synthetic cocaine? I don't know why we removed this one. I think this had to do, several years ago, there was a story of an individual who was on, I wanna say it was Spice, and he like ate someone's face off or something like that. Does anyone remember this?
Soap suds or something, or?
Yeah.
Bath
salts.
salts. It was bath salts.
Maybe because you're a nurse.
Is that what took this one?
Yeah, and
Talk about Hannibal Lecter.
so we think that's why this one specifically ended up in our code, but if you look at all of the other drug-related charges in state law, they're being dealt with at the state level. We really don't write many into municipal court other than underage alcohol or marijuana. Part of the reason, just me coming in and looking, we have one probation officer, and she's really focusing on domestic violence cases, and a lot of drug charges. There are mandates now in state court that require supervision to include substance abuse treatment and counseling. That would probably not make sense the way our municipal court is set up, and so it really made sense to keep this with all the other drug charges that were in state court.
And even
So
the
that's-
identification of some of these substances is probably a little bit more technical than what we have here with our NIC kits and things like that for testing. So just didn't think that was appropriate or needed here in the municipal court.
Another huge chunk of what we're doing is cleaning up or simplifying language or clarifying it. Many of the codes, as you've probably seen, are fairly old or have been in place for quite some time. And perhaps just looking at how they were working in the court system, some of our processes related to probation or our deferred judgments, in consultation with the court, we were able to suggest removing some unnecessary language, clarifying some of those processes for how it's practically working, and again, updating outdated language. I think this is, yeah, the last slide as far as an overview, wanted to at least put your attention on 2 of the sections that would affect specific surcharges and what we're proposing there and why. We currently have an electronic citation surcharge, which is covering costs related to the police department side of it right now. I don't think very many are going to the court side. Currently, that surcharge is $6.75 per citation. We are requesting to raise it to $10 in consultation with the courts to reflect some of their operating costs. We did look to nearby jurisdictions, reach out to them to see if they had a similar surcharge. I did not hear back from anyone who did. I think this is pretty unique to Littleton, specifically related to the electronic citations. Secondly, there is a section related to surcharges that are based on our Victim Assistance Law Enforcement Fund. Statewide, there is a 37% surcharge that goes to victim assistance and law enforcement. Ours right now in Littleton is 10%, and it is worded kind of strangely where it was 10% of a fine or 10% of a supervision charge. So we're proposing changed language where it's either a 15% surcharge on fines or flat fee of $25 for those where no fines are imposed. So it kind of cleans that language up a little bit and brings us closer to the state amount. Statewide, the court clerk did reach out to other jurisdictions to see where the municipal courts were using these surcharges and what their percentages were. There was a great range. We're right in the middle with what we're proposing. So I hope that makes sense.
Why would we not go the state average?
So I would say that one of the things that is missed with the state is the state's fines are often quite a bit lower than what you might see in a municipality. So I'm not sure how 37 or 35% comes in or 37% comes in as far as the total, but we do feel as if we're a little bit low in what we're charging or what we're assessing in terms of a fee related to that. But not overly low, like.
But then why wouldn't you go to this, I mean, if 15's not covering whatever we hope to cover, why not increase it more?
Well, that would involve a more robust cost of service type analysis that you're gonna hear from in a little bit. But I think we feel comfortable right now with 15%. I'll tell you, Judge Feldman is very hesitant about raising fees and raising fines. So where you may find language within the code that removed perhaps a limitation on the court, it's not gonna affect the way that Judge Feldman is going to continue to fine people at what he feels is appropriate and fair. So I don't see a huge change if these ordinances or these fee considerations are asked for, but I can tell you, and I'm sure Mark Rolfe could talk to you about the court has lots of asks, and they've asked for some additional support and resources for courts because they haven't been able to granted, every department has asked for something, but there's a lot of needs for the municipal court, and in terms of trying to raise some of those fees to offset some of the costs, that's why we made those proposals.
Council, any other questions? Yes.
I have two questions and one comment. So on page 5, it said it's under general smoking restrictions, add prohibition of smoking in certain public outdoor spaces. What gets excluded from certain?
Probably driving in your car down Santa Fe is probably still okay. I'm not sure
Yep.
you'll have a list into it.
Does that mean that people can smoke in parades or?
Okay, yep, I know where you're going with this
Yeah.
one. So it's under 610.2, which is our general smoking restrictions. That's broken down to several different areas. One is the downtown area. The next big chunk is certain indoor areas that are kind of outlined in state law. So our proposed changes will track that. And then we've added a subsection C, I believe based on prior council input, that perhaps there were other outdoor places that smoking should be banned. And there, the proposed change reads, in any outdoor public park, trail, or open space. And that language is just proposed after looking at some other outdoor smoking bans that I researched across the state, but clearly ultimately that would be up to you guys. It's proposed language at this point to capture what we believe was the input. So that's all that is. That's completely new section where we're proposing language.
I have two more things.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. So, the electronic citation surcharge, I know Judge Feldman doesn't like to raise fees, that's $6.75, how long has that been in place?
Trying to remember when that one went.
This was actually the court's ask. So Judge Feldman was actually supportive of this particular raise because it wasn't offsetting the cost for the clerk's office as it relates to processing those. So that was what he asked for.
And that's been in place since 2014 when that section was adopted.
Could it go up to 15? Would that,
It's up to you guys.
Theoretically, it could go up to anything, but you know, the trick to a lot of these fees is to make sure you're offsetting the cost of performing the service. It's not, a fee is not to make money. It's really just to offset the cost that the city is incurring.
okay, thank you, thanks. And then one last thing, thank you so much for not trying to get folks into trouble that are using 911 improperly when they may not know, because we had an elderly neighbor who had Alzheimer's and he thought that his neighbors they had a gas leak from their house and it was pouring into his backyard. He called and called and called, and it finally got so bad that the police told the family, like, you gotta do something because we're gonna have to arrest him.
Yeah, the intent is obviously not to have a chilling effect on people's perceptions of a perceived emergency. So I think we've crafted it in a way that you really have to be intentionally misusing 911, not confused or have a different understanding as to what's going on.
Okay, is that it, Kelly?
Yeah.
All right, good, Scott.
Good.
Yeah, at our agenda meeting last Friday, I had asked the city attorney to get, just in fairness, some feedback from the criminal defense bar and wanted to ask if there's any update on that.
So we shared it with Arnie Shunnison, who's the city's public defender, who manages the public defender cases at the municipal court. Did not share that with him until this weekend, but based on his input, that certainly can be reflected, and I'll give council an update between hopefully before second reading on this as it comes forward on ordinance.
I'm sorry, I'm not following the context behind that. What was
Yeah, so the input we've gotten so far is from two former prosecutors, from the municipal judge, but we're missing one critical stakeholder, which is the criminal defense bar. And so I want to know what their feedback is on these proposed changes. And quite frankly, I don't expect that they'll have a lot of feedback, but I won't support the changes until I at least see the
Yeah,
feedback.
I'm thinking a majority of the changes are just kind of cleanup, and so there probably wouldn't be any pushback. There may be a couple ordinances that they may not like the wording of, and you know, we'll take that feedback to council and we'll report when we hear back.
And I can tell you, Scott, I've met with him separately on other issues courthouse related and did tell him we were working on this and asked if there was anything he saw, either practically how it was working in court or things he thought was missing or that were a problem in the code. If he had any suggestions, and if there were any, those were incorporated. I don't recall any specifically off the top of my head. But after the proposed changes have been made, they're now with him.
All right, ma'am.
This is Nit, smoking, is that banned in outdoor concerts too? I mean, I'm thinking of like Hudson Gardens, is that technically private land? I don't know, and then Vega Park and Littleton Museum. I don't know what you said is included.
Right now, the proposed language just says in any outdoor public park, trail, or open space, but that can be crafted.
I don't know, if you wanna include something like that.
I support that.
If you've sat in a concert with somebody smoking whatever behind you, it's tough.
Could we enforce that on private property?
Most of the time, we have our law enforcement officers over there anyways, over at Hudson Gardens. A lot of times it's traffic, but other times just to make sure alcohol consumption is under control. that they're there to respond to any disturbances that may arise.
When I say enforced, meaning can we actually put that limitation on a private property?
I think in this context and setting, we probably could. I think most venues, and I don't know if Hudson Gardens does this specifically, has their own smoking prohibitions, you know, whether or not it's going to Mile High or anything like that, that they're not gonna want people smoking in there.
Then there's the public, like Vega Park, the museum,
Those would be considered public parks, right? Vega Park, the museum, that's public property, so.
so then that would fall.
I think she said the museum has a ban.
And was looking under that section B where I said there's a bunch of places that are indoor that's already banned under the Colorado Clean Indoor Act, and it does list theaters, museums, libraries, public buildings.
It just might be worth considering.
We'll look into that.
Patrick?
Thank you. This is a big lift. Is this the entire code that you're updating? Is there more to this? I mean, I look at that one book there. What's that?
This is all this. This is all criminal code related,
Okay.
so I know there's going to be a piece code enforcement wise, which
Yeah.
is separate.
I think in the future, you'll probably see something on kind of the code enforcement aspect. Obviously, parking becomes an issue and there are certain questions regarding that and certain ways to refine kind of some of the parking violations. That was actually one of the questions that we had that we wanted to find out how city council felt about it. So currently, parking accounts for, I would say, parking violations account for almost half the tickets written into the city. I think, and I wish Danielle Trujillo, the court administrator, were here, but it's about 9,500 tickets are issued into our municipal court, and close to about 45% of those are parking violations. And so within our parking prohibitions, we have a set fine for parking. And so if you get a parking ticket, it's $25. Outside of handicap tickets, those are much larger in terms of violating that. But a standard parking ticket in the city of Arvada is $25. And obviously that's a policy question, a council question in terms of whether or not council is comfortable with that number, or if they wanna raise that number.
Littleton.
Arvada.
And it has been since 2011, it looks like.
So fines have been in place for almost 10 years.
When's the second reading on this, and when will it go into effect?
Second
Approximately?
reading, I believe, is March 17th. First reading is March 3rd.
What do other comparable cities charge? I mean, is $25 reasonable, too high, too low?
I try not to get parking tickets, but it's probably about $50.
So maybe we're low.
I think we're a little low.
Do we want to be comparable to other cities?
Are we ready for that conversation right now, or should we just be something thinking about for the future?
And we can certainly do a survey of what some other surrounding jurisdictions, what's the going rate for parking violations in terms of time parking violations or those types of things. And report back to city council between now and second reading to say this is kind of what we found. And if you're okay with 25, that's fine. We're not trying to push, more fines or fees on anyone. It's just, 9 years ago was 9 years ago, so just didn't know if council felt differently now.
And parking tickets definitely generate messages to city council members too, so I look forward to hearing from you. Great.
I do wanna come back to the loitering. So it does say, the section that you're striking from loitering talks about any person that loiters or prowls in a place at a time or in a manner unusual for law-abiding individuals. So this is someone's hanging out in front of your house at 3 o'clock in the morning, just kind of looking at your window. That's concerning. And so how do we, and there's a lot of other examples we hear from business owners as well. So how do we capture that? Because that is, feels threatening. I look at disorderly conduct and it's, to me, loitering is a form of disorderly conduct. So is there any language that can even address some of that, the presence of an individual that perhaps shouldn't be there, or maybe intoxicated or other things that feels unsafe?
You wanna take this one?
Absolutely not.
That's
She
kind
just
of
gave me
where
the opportunity to look really smart.
that's kind of where, again, unfortunately, if they're somewhere where legally they're able to be, let's say on a sidewalk outside of business or not on your property, because if they're on your property, inside your fence line or on your yard, you can call in like a trespass call, right? If they're on your property when they shouldn't be. But if they're on your sidewalk, which is a public sidewalk, or in front of a business where they're legally entitled to be, that's where the constitutional issues kind of present themselves if they're not necessarily doing anything wrong. We all know, like, if you have a hunch, you're like, okay, something's about to happen. What are they doing? They are peering in windows. That's where, again, it comes down to it. Nothing stops the police from contacting them. They have reasonable suspicion to contact them, figure out what they're doing. The way, again, that our section is written says the police have to ask them, what are you doing? Give them the opportunity to say whether they're there lawfully or not. If they are, we can't charge them under our loitering statute as written anyways, or our section. If they're not, and they are doing something that lets the police know it's unlawful, that's where we kind of talk about all those other sections that we have, like if you're obstructing a business right away or a road or a sidewalk that falls within obstructing, or is it a trespass because they are close to your private residence? We're looking to those. Does that make sense?
It does, it just feels that it just introduces risk and uncertainty in some of our, the safety of our neighbors or businesses.
It's good.
We just add to Ashley's response to that question that, to my mind, as someone who practices criminal defense law, that the writing really is on the wall that our loitering statute is constitutionally vague and overbroad, meaning that if we bring a loitering prosecution and it's successful in the sense of resulting in a conviction, that conviction is going to be wide open to constitutional challenge, meaning that the prosecution is going to turn out to be dramatically less effective than if we just charge someone not under the loitering ordinance, but under something like Ashley's mentioned, all of the other code provisions that we could use.
So you both have mentioned that it's vague, so is there a way to make it more defined?
And I've looked at that because I looked at other loitering statutes, and it's almost, this is why there's not very many left. And I believe, in my personal opinion, the ones that are left are probably not going to be there for very long. I looked at whether we could narrowly tailor it enough, and I think language I was coming up with really looked more like our other sections that I keep referring to, like obstructing or trespassing, to really get to the heart of what the illegal thing is that they're doing. Loitering really is just that initial suspicion that they're probably doing something they shouldn't do, and again, the police would still be able to contact them even with that behavior. There's something I'm missing.
No, I mean,
I think you've addressed it. Yeah, it's a tough one, no doubt about it. Council, any other questions? Scott, you good?
I want to bring up panhandling, and does that get addressed in this type of, in this section here, or just something?
you know, that was actually repealed by the city a couple years ago when the Supreme Court case, Reed v. Gilbert came out, which really dealt with signs, but as kind of an offshoot of that, it was found to be, unconstitutional to prohibit someone's First Amendment right to exercise freedom of speech. So they can have a sign that says, $5, anything helps, God bless you, and that's illegal, but suddenly I can have a sign that says vote for Pat Driscoll. That's okay. So as soon as you start going into looking at the content of the message, that's where we're afoul.
What about the difference between, freedom of speech, a sign, versus panhandling, which I'm here to receive something? So there is a distinction between freedom of speech and soliciting for
Sure,
money or something else. So
And I
is
think
there-
along that line too, is that it's one thing to stand on a sidewalk, it's another thing to stand on a traffic median. That's where you and I have had that conversation.
Sure, and so
And I don't think we're here to discuss it tonight, but maybe in
No,
the future,
but
you can see a concern there.
just appreciating kind of the differences, we allow certain firefighters to go walk among traffic with a boot and say, fill up the boot, for part of their, their benefits that they're collecting for, but yet another individual, suddenly that's illegal when they do it, but it's okay if the fire department does it. So it's really more of making sure that you're applying it uniformly. And you're not getting into the content of what they're doing. So the act of having someone stop to actually have to make that exchange with you, I mean, that's part of it, which gets more into the safety aspect. And I think that's where, if the city were to look at banning those sorts of activities where it leads to an exchange of goods or foods or any sort of thing in a roadway, that's certainly something that can go towards. It has nothing to do with the speech, it has nothing to do with what's being asked, it's the manner in which it's being done, it's the safety implications. There was a case out of Utah that recently came out where the Court of Appeals did uphold a solicitation ban in Sandy City. Sandy City's ordinance was specifically designed to prohibit solicitation on medians that were less than, I think, 36 inches in width. And so they were able to really narrowly tailor their type of ordinance to be more of a safety concern, that we can't have individuals at these specific intersections in this median when it's less than 36, and the courts found that that was okay. I will say Greeley has been being challenged by the ACLU. They have a similar ordinance that prohibited people from soliciting within the median. However, Greeley's case did not actually have a width like Sandy City did. So we're still kind of monitoring that and trying to find out exactly what's gonna come about from those cases. But certainly there's a lot of medians within the city of Littleton which are, pretty narrow. I mean, I look at the one on Broadway, Littleton Boulevard where, there's someone out there all the time and it's, it's probably 12 inches and it's curved, so it's kind of concave, which makes it a little bit more dangerous in weather. So certainly I think if council were to really want to do something like that, I think that's something that we could do. I just caution council that if council directs the city attorney to prepare something like that, we will almost undoubtedly be challenged in litigation with that, so it's just an additional thing for us to worry about, so. I'm kind of hopeful that I'm gonna wait for other cities to
I think
do
it only
that
makes
battle.
sense is if we're gonna enforce it, right? I mean, you can have it in writing, but are the cops gonna spend the time enforcing, or who's gonna patrol that?
Alright, if there's any other questions, if not,
One more,
let
is
Scott,
there,
let's let Scott go.
oh, sorry.
Just real quick, Reed, off the top of your head, what do you think it would cost the city to defend that likely section 1983 federal civil rights case against the ACLU? Because I think that's an important piece of context here.
I'd have to check our policy with CIRSA to find out. We have a deductible for when the city gets sued on a lot of things. We have a deductible through our insurance carrier, and depending on what we're getting sued for, there's a larger deductible. So 1983 action on something like that, a violation of First Amendment rights, the deductible would probably be $100,000, so we would be responsible for paying that amount until we hit that deductible. I'm not sure how much it would be. I don't necessarily want to find out, but
Yeah, exactly, alright.
Yeah, I just don't want us to overlook the real life of these lawsuits, right? The federal section 1983 litigation I've done has gone on for years at a time, right?
Oh, for
It's humongously expensive, and if we don't have some reasonable likelihood of succeeding, then talking about these kinds of ordinances is just not worth it.
you have one pending 1983 piece of litigation that the city's been undergoing for, we're going on 3 years now. And it's certainly very costly in terms of monies. It certainly probably has an effect on our insurance premiums, not only for the city of Littleton, but all the other jurisdictions that are part of CIRSA, which is our insurance pool. So the more money that they have to spend defending lawsuits against various cities, the more expensive it gets for the various cities to maintain that coverage and those levels. So, and not to mention staff time. This one has to do with our police department. We've spent countless hours with the police department having to deal with these issues.
Yep, I think it's a tough one. I think Scott brings up a good point. If there's nothing else, Director, you have, okay, one more, let's move on.
Is there a littering like you can't litter in public?
Yes, that's
Okay.
already in our code and we are not proposing any changes to that section.
Remember, it's that Indian guy.
Is that it? Alright, is that, if there's no, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It's actually in
Oh.
It's actually in
Such a good point. Yeah, we might really want it, but at what cost? And that's the conversation,
Well, that's just it, yeah.
that's where I am on it, is yeah, I don't like it, but is it really practical?
All right, next up, we have the Tiffany Show. We have it's ID number 20-054, the 2020 budget amendment to carry over encumbrances from 2019. So this is the finance director, Tiffany Hood. We have 30 minutes on that, but I'm told it shouldn't take us 30 minutes.
Don't be afraid, come to the table.
You must be calling me, this is like the lowrider chair. And the clock did start 30 seconds ago.
5 minutes, that's all I'm gonna do. All right, good evening, council. Before you, we're gonna be discussing in this study session our 2020 budget amendment, the first one of the year, which is gonna include carryover encumbrances from 2019. The purpose here is we're requesting support for this amendment to the 2020 budget for the encumbered funds from 2019. A little bit of background, this is kind of a newer process to Littleton. In prior years, we would just automatically carry forward these encumbrances and purchase orders, but to be open and transparent with council and with citizens, and it's just good practice throughout the United States and Colorado, is we want to formally reappropriate any projects, goods, or services that were not spent or completed in the prior year. We want to reappropriate these in the 2020 or current year budget. We issue purchase orders throughout the year, hundreds of them annually are related to projects, goods, or services. They're not always able to be completed, and so that leaves them open at the end of the year, and we, as I mentioned, want to formally reappropriate these. Some staff analysis. This year, we have 111 purchase orders that are open across all funds. The total amount is about $7.5 million. And I think the majority of these are related to the capital projects fund. So these might be, for instance, all of Keith's projects that haven't been completed yet in 2019 that we've already appropriated or budgeted in 2019, and we want to carry those forward. Some other ones in the general fund are related to maybe some Track It 9. We're updating the permitting system. We've been going through that for a little while now, and we're still gonna continue that into 2020, so we wanna make sure we have the funds to do that. A few of the other things that we are carrying forward is the city offers revitalization incentive grants. And these are grants that are available for commercial properties throughout Littleton. They can apply for a grant through the city. And those projects take quite a while. Some are 2 years, they could be in phases. And so we want to make sure that once a property is applied and we've granted that to them, that those funds are available to pay that out when those projects are completed. A few of the other larger ones are replacement of street poles related to Xcel Energy. We started a project a couple of years ago to address some structural issues with some of our street poles throughout the city. And they're doing a phase-in to replace some of those. And so we want to carry over, I believe it's about $286,000 related to that particular project. As I mentioned, the fiscal impacts in total, it's about $7.5 million. I did want to kind of give you a little context as to where we ended in 2019. We're working on finalizing the 2019 year, and we're definitely under budget for 2019. Majority of these projects were included in our estimates when we prepared the 2020 budget, so they've already been accounted for going into year 2020. So the ending fund balance that you see in 2020, we're still gonna be well under that, even with these carryover amounts from 2019 into 2020. Some options: support the amendment, and staff will bring an ordinance forward for formal adoption, or do not support the amendment. I would caution, if we don't support the amendment, there could be some projects that would be put on hold or potentially not completed that we already probably are in the midst of working on going forward. Staff recommendation is to approve it, and we will provide an ordinance for first reading on March 3rd. I told you 5 minutes or less and we would get to the end. I'm sure you have questions, so I have Jennifer and Keith here to help answer any specific questions, maybe related to their projects or some of the others.
Patrick?
And this is Karina's question, but I thought I understood exactly what you were presenting, but then when Karina asked the question where was it? Here it is the 1.5 million for general fund that is being reappropriated in 2020 included in the 2019 expenditures? You
Right.
said it was not included in the 2019 expenditures, so
That's correct. It's not included in the 2019 expenditures, so that it hasn't been spent yet. It'll actually be reported in the year that it actually gets spent, so that would be 2020 or
Okay.
potentially a future year if it continues into 2021.
That makes me feel better.
Can you clarify, is that expenditure for that portion of the project or the whole project?
It would be the portion that we're carrying over would be reported.
So
Now,
if
there could be expenditures that might have already been spent in 2019 that
That
have been reported, but this is to fulfill that full commitment of that project or good or service.
So in the budget book, the
Yes.
2020 budget book, so in this particular version of 2019, does it have the 1.5 million, for example, of the general fund?
Yes,
then?
the majority of that has been included in the estimate of the 2020 budget, yes.
So this would be a revised number, so 2019 expenditures would go down and 2020
Would
go
Go
up.
up, yes, absolutely.
At work.
Just to put a little more context to this issue here, a couple of councils ago, we had this discussion about having this carryover being acted on in February. Our practice had been really that we only make one appropriation here basically at the end of the year. And council got concerned that they weren't seeing how these projects were being carried over sooner than that. And so that's why we started to get into this practice of bringing this carryover here in February for council to review and approve.
And I think there was a question as to whether the projects or purchase orders are segregated in our financial system, and they are. So once we assign it a purchase order or an adjustment, then that'll carry forward through our system. And when you see the monthly report that we provide to council every month, there's a separate column that says prior year encumbrances, and that's where you'll see these amounts separated.
So one of the things that I just wanna kind of call out and for us to reflect and think about, especially when you start seeing big numbers like 7 million. When we come to the budget process in the summer, we're making decisions of what to support and what not to support. And because some of these projects are being put forward, other projects are being denied in that particular year. So if these go on for a year, 2 years, 3 years, we've lost, some other project that may have had the opportunity at that time now lost the opportunity. How do we address that, or can we bring that to the table to discuss during the budget process if there should be kind of a statute of limitations that if you don't use the funds within 2 years or without some reasonable reason why, because then it just kind of.
Yeah, I'll give maybe my perspective and maybe look to Keith and Jennifer here. I think that in large part, I think we're trying to change the approach here within the city on how we kind of forecast and manage a lot of this. Quite honestly, in my opinion, there wasn't really a lot of accountability to that very issue of what it is we project and budget and the execution of that. So I think, and I'm gonna look to Keith in particular here, because I know he's put staff on board who really are looking very specifically at that issue. The last thing that staff wants to do in a budget is to overpromise. So we want to be realistic, and that's why we're trying to go to a 5-year projection, so that the council does get an opportunity to kind of discuss what really is happening over that 5-year period. Because we don't want to unnecessarily encumber funds when council could make some other decisions based on your priorities.
I'll respond to that. One of the, if you look, for example, at the list in there here of encumbrances, mostly for public works, the vast majority of them are projects that take more than a year. Either they're ongoing, asset management, some multi-year project, and it will always be. The Rio Grande Bridge project, that's a 2.5-year project from start to finish. So there's no way we can avoid carrying money over from year to year. That's just the length of the project. So when we budget that project initially from day one, that's the budget throughout. One of our primary goals with our project management approach now is that, you know, we have a history before I got here of having projects at times kind of run amok, you know, and they were, you know, you budget 100 and they're 175 or something, for example. And that's one of the things we're trying to avoid. And all the projects that you see in here were forecasted like that. So, you know, when we look at, for example, Rio Grande, it's $800,000 over 2.5 years. And that goes into design, acquisition, and construction, approvals, and all that. And it's just the way a project works. You know, a perfect example of this is going to be Mineral in Santa Fe. You know, if you look at the start to finish, I mean, we've had money on that project now for at least 2 years. And we'll be 6+ by the time we get done. And then there'll be another year or two just related to tying up reporting on the federal funds. So, you know, that's just the way some of those things happen. You know, big projects take that.
Right, but we're not encumbering the whole amount from, let's say, this year. If it's a $5 million project, we're not holding $5 million. We're only funding maybe $1 million with the intention of funding $1 million to follow.
Yeah, we planned for it. When you look at the 5-year capital plan and maintenance plan that we have now that you saw for the first time in the fall here, that shows you our multi-year approach. You know, if we only need, you know, let's take Mineral in Santa Fe. In the first year, you need $1 million for design and some right-of-way acquisition. Year 2 might be 1.7. Year 3 and 4 might be 4 and 5. And that's how you plan the money out over that time span. You don't lump it all in one. And
right, and the money that we're moving to the 2020 is intended to be spent in 19. It just didn't happen.
Well, yes, that's true. But there are projects, for example, there's POs that we cut in 19, and we knew from day one they would not be finished in 2019. So that's that carryover of a project, and I mean I can pick a couple of examples out to show you where, you know, it's just going to take longer to do the project.
But to Karina's point though, we just want to make sure we're not holding up money that could have been used in 2019.
No, we're more than happy to spend it.
That's not how I'm understanding it. So if, because we've seen it like in open space, like we actually see design is 1 year, you know, build is the next year, so we've seen that. And I think what I've heard is, you know, especially the transportation projects, they are going to be multi-year, and let's just pick a number, $3 million. We know we're not going to spend all $3 million in that given year, but we've encumbered, and it's part of our expenditure number, that $3 million in that first year, even though we know it may likely go up over a 2 or 3 year period.
And I think it kind of depends. So, you know, like a capital project, it's gonna be year by year, but we might have like the RMS project that's 500,000. And we know that didn't occur in 2019, but we encumbered the full 500,000. And that one was kind of related to a grant as well. So it
So I
kind
guess
of,
what I'm asking is, of the 7 million, how much of that, all of that was encumbered in 2019, that's why we have to move it now to 2020. How, you know, to ask the question another way, did we know how much of that 7 million, did we already have a good sense that we probably would not have expended all of it in 2019?
I don't know that I have an answer for that right now. But I can definitely note that and we can look at that. I think one other thing I wanted to add too is, you know, you were worried about projects carried over multiple years. You know, finance department really reaches out to the departments to have them justify why the project wasn't completed or why they might need to carry it over multiple years. So there's probably very few on the list that were from maybe 2018. I can think of only one that was actually originally from 2018, but we did have robust discussions as to, you know, what is your need? Do you still have that need? Let's talk about that. And so we do work with the departments to ensure that the monies are gonna be used.
Which one was that?
That one was,
Scott has a question too, I wanna make sure everybody gets a chance to
It's
talk.
related to this, so
Yeah.
if I'm to follow up, I'm
yeah. So that one in particular was related to the telephone system. So in 2018, we had, they wanted to replace or update our telephone system, but due to staffing changes in 2019, they weren't able to get there. And so now they're reevaluating what they're gonna do with that system.
How was the decision made whether to encumber all of the project funds up front or whether to encumber only a portion of the funds in year one and then a portion in year two and so on?
I think that just depends on the funding and
Yeah,
multiple sources.
generally speaking, construction season runs in the summer and in the fall, fall out. So it's very possible that, you may start a project in May and you're not punch listed until March. So it's gotta carry over, so list is big. You'd encumber a project like that, all in that first year, cause you're gonna finish it. Whereas if we have a multi-stage project, like, for example, a major road project, we're gonna put design in 1 year, or do, design and right-of-way acquisition in year 2, construction in 2 and 3, or something like that is typically what we would do. I can just tell you that prior to the last couple of years, Mark can speak to this, that was not the process here within Public Works. I mean, the 5-year street plan that you all saw in the fall was the first time that's ever been produced here. So, that's a complete change. What my objective is to deliver projects as effectively and as cost efficiently as possible in the shortest time frame. Sometimes that may not happen. An example where that's not happened, where we had to make better business decisions, was federal and Bowles. Okay, that money came about because of the Tabor override. And we've bid that on the street twice. And because of the market, the first time nobody bid. And the second time the bids were 45% higher than the engineer's estimate. So we went back to all the bidders and we said, look, we're gonna do this again, tell us what we need to change, let's talk through this. Because we historically here don't have a process of selecting somebody and negotiating pricing, significant pricing changes in a project like that. So that's an oddball situation, but we had to make a business decision and it's the right one. So that's an example of an ongoing one. But generally, if we know we're gonna do a project within 12 months, we're gonna put it all in this year because it's gonna carry to the next year. There's no point from a management standpoint, let's say it's 600,000, splitting 3 and 3 just because it's a carryover of year, even though it's a completely same contract, everything, same plan, same purchase order. To me, that doesn't make a ton of sense. It's just more management paperwork that doesn't really add any value. So, as long as you're doing quality project tracking, you have quality project management, and you have a financial system that can support that in terms of data and information, then you should be able to manage your projects pretty tightly. And here in Colorado, we got a window. We can't start construction till May, usually, April if we're lucky. This year, Mother Nature might push us to June at the rate she's going, is what it feels like right now. But, so that's how we'll do some things. If it's a multi-year project and we know it more than 12 to 18 months, then we'll budget that over multiple years.
All right, I wanna give the other council, Pam, do you have anything?
No, that answers my questions.
I wanted to add one other piece too. Another issue might be funding. So if we have a $10 million project that's over 5 years, we may not have available fund balance or revenues to cover that this year. And so then that's why we would appropriate it annually as well over multiple years. Because we might be waiting for revenues to come in to help pay for that portion of the project.
Mark, City Manager.
Oh, I just wanna make sure that council has the right impression here. We've actually come a long ways in how we try to manage and predict our level of expenditure here. And so I don't wanna leave you with the impression that somehow we're missing an opportunity here. If you do have a specific question about a project or a number that's on there, I'd be more than happy to have myself or staff talk to you about that issue here. But in my opinion, we have come a long ways on how we manage these issues.
All right, if we don't have anything else, are you ready to just move into the next part of the council? I think we're ready to move on. Anybody need a break? Y'all good? All right, so we're gonna move into our next one. Is the cost of service study, which is regards the potential for changes to the city fee schedule.
Director of Finance.
You want the hot seat?
Keith, how's your budget doing on plowing this year? Is that shot?
No, not really.
Okay, we're doing
I
pretty
sent out an email to all of you
Next one.
through the current storm.
I did say
And we try and keep an eye on that, and it's one of those things where, the nuances of a season happen, snow is more expensive between Thursday and Sunday night than it is between Monday morning and Wednesday evening. It's just the way it works.
That was a very good report that you did.
Yeah, thanks. As a matter of fact, I read that and I
It really
just,
does break it
So
down.
if you have questions when you get that, feel free to just get a hold of me and we'll let you know what's going on.
We do run out of money on March first, but short of that, we're fine.
Yeah, all right, take it away.
Alright, so the next topic is the cost of services study. So we're gonna review a little bit of the cost of service study, and then we're gonna discuss some recommended adjustments to some fees. A little bit of background, so the cost of services study kind of came about in 2017 during a budget, the preparation of the 2018 budget. We looked at some of our development review fees and realized that we had some engineering fees that we weren't even charging for. And so I appreciate council's support to just jump in and charge 100% on all of those fees. However, we needed to do a cost of service study to really understand what the cost of those services were. So we did that in 2018, and we did make several adjustments to the development review fees for engineering and planning. And in addition to that, we wanted to go ahead and move forward with looking at some other fees that the city currently has. And so we called that a phase 2, and that's what we're gonna go over a little bit tonight. So one of the things that was in our principles of sound financial management is that the city should periodically review the cost of services related to the fees that it's charging. And with this study, we contracted with MGT to provide an in-depth analysis of a number of fees. And what they did is they provided us Excel spreadsheet, some forms and such that we can now do this in-house. So we wanted to have the mechanism in place, the format, and the knowledge of this model so that we could continue this going forward internally. I know everyone was kind of hoping that we'd have like a golden nugget or something out of the cost of services, but I will say relatively, the city doesn't have too many fees that we currently charge. The development review fees are probably the majority of the ones that we charge. We get sales tax revenues, which is a tax. So unfortunately, we're just recommending some minor adjustments to some current fees. There's a minimal change overall related to these changes, but what it'll do is this study will provide us a baseline for some of our future reviews that we might do on any services that we charge throughout the city. So overall, there's only 4 that we would like council to consider a change to. The sewer and stormwater utility account transfer fee. This actually is a revenue to the sewer and storm drainage fund. But what this is a fee that we charge title companies when they want to change property ownership on a property that we service sewer or storm drainage. There's actually a lot of time involved with getting that information from the title company, looking up in our system, creating a prorated fee or balance for that property, and then sending that information to the title company. So we currently charge $18 for that, and we would like to increase the fee to $22. Just to kind of give you an idea, we probably get 5 to 10 of these a day is what we're getting. And so it takes a lot of staff work to manage that process. We've really streamlined it over the past few years, but it still does take time and it's necessary. The other one is film permits. We don't do very many of these during the year. We haven't charged a fee for this. So we're recommending a nominal fee of $12 related to that. Again, with the document certification, if someone were to come to the city and want us to maybe notarize a formal document, or a court requires something to be notarized by the city clerk, we charge $2, so we would like to change that to $35. Again, we don't get very many of those. The one larger change that we're recommending is a change to our rental property annual license. So this is related to multifamily units. We charge a $10 annual fee for them to register with the city currently. And what we would like to recommend is that we kind of tier that. We do a $75 fee for properties that have units from 3 to 25, and then $125 for units that are 26 or more. And this is an annual process, and this actually starts in November each year. And so we started in November sending out notices, and then the actual information, I believe, goes out in January with payment in February. So this would actually be a change for 2021, but I think it's important for us to have some lead time to, at least educate the public on a change like this, because it could impact people who own maybe one property or something.
While you're stuck on that slide, $35 to notify a single page?
And only 22 for the sewer, yeah, it's.
I mean, that just seems so
Yeah.
over the top. Are you just trying to discourage from people from coming out and getting stuff notarized?
No, not really. I think it's just
Pretty much.
We don't-
$35 you go to UPS or FedEx and get it done for
we don't do that many of them. We honestly don't do that many. I mean, I think the cost is just a little more expensive on that side because we have to notarize them, and it's a legal document, and so.
Is it a stack of documents or one page you're talking?
It could be both. It could be either. It doesn't.
Yeah, Scott, I know you had a question.
It's not a simple notarization, right? It's a document certification.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. I say notary, but it could be a certification from the city clerk or a public official record or something like that.
Right, which can't be done by Kinko's or FedEx or something. It's-
Right, yeah.
Karina?
The 3 to 25 units, that just seems such a broad range. When I think of, the property owner that maybe has 3 or maybe even a 4-plex, or even a 6-plex or an 8-plex is very different than one that has 20 or 15. So why such a big range there, as opposed to making that a smaller range like 3 to 10, for example, and then 10 and above is 125. So can you give some context to that?
So this had to do with actually the number of properties that we have that have that 3 to 25 number of units as opposed to the 26 or more units. We actually have quite a few more properties that fall in that 3 to 25. And the actual cost, so I mean the cost is services study. So the actual cost to do a rental registration, whether it is for 1 unit or 125, is about $86 an hour.
Why not just make a flat fee of $100 for the entire thing? Keep it simple.
But 100 to a person that has 3 versus 100 to a person that has 50.
Nothing.
Pam, I know, Pam has a question, I think.
Silly question, what's a film permit?
I was gonna ask.
So if a movie production wants to film in Littleton, then they have to get a permit for that.
Isn't that kind of low?
It's pretty common.
We're trying to
I think
attract
it's-
Hollywood.
I think it's.
I mean, lots of times those productions are have a lot of money and,
Yeah,
I mean, it's not even worth it.
but we get a lot of advertising from that, if they're filming in Littleton, so, there's an advertising aspect of it too.
Is it comparable to like Denver or?
I think there's
I'm just thinking it's awful low.
What's that?
It's
Yeah.
hardly, I mean, yes, we want people to film in Littleton, but
Yeah, No, I think, the purpose of a cost of service study is to relate the fee to the cost of actually providing the service. And so, while some people, you wanna look at what other cities are charging for that service, well, there may be some underlying differences between what they what it costs them versus what it costs Littleton.
So that's an easy one, is what you're saying, okay.
City manager has a question.
No, actually Tiffany made the very point. It's a cost of service.
Yeah. Thank you. Very clear.
So I'm gonna come back to my comment. If it's costing us $86 and our majority of our units are in the 3 to 25, we're undercharging for a big majority. Again, why, not understanding why we would do that. And is there a valid cost of service argument to make for 30 units that it should be 125? So it just doesn't seem like it's aligning with
So I think coming up with the 75 and 125, one is related to the number of units and the quantity that are 3 to 25. But the other is we were using them together. And so the cost of both of those, or the total number of properties related to the number that we have, is the 75 and 125. We wanted the increase to be relative to the actual cost in total. Does that make sense? I may not be clear what I'm trying to say. I think it's.
So you're getting to an average of 86 once you
Yes.
pen out those
By
numbers, pencil out
unit,
those
you could
numbers.
look at it maybe by unit.
All right, you got a few more slides to go here.
Do I? I was hoping I was done. So one of the largest areas of the cost of service study was related to building development fees. And while there are some recommended increases or decreases in the reports, we feel that because we're gonna be revising our codes for the international building codes, we feel like we wanna use this model to help align with the amendments that we're gonna have to the international building codes later in 2020. So at this point, we are not looking to recommend any changes to any of the building code related fees until we can align it with the building code updates.
We also did receive feedback from contractors that they prefer fees to be adjusted once a year, not every few months, so they have to keep track of it. So that again is why we'd like to lump it together when we update and bring that forward, which we anticipate sometime this fall. We would bring forward revised fees for the for building code, as well as taking a look at our development review fees again.
And that's what our consultant's doing. I mean, they're reviewing all these, right?
So the IBC is different. The International Building Code we'll actually be doing internally. Updating it.
Yeah, and then we'll have the model that we have so that we can plug in any estimated numbers or salaries or costs at that time. We'll plug it into the model to come up with a fee at that
So we can do that internally, we don't have to go to a consultant to do that for us every year.
Exactly,
Correct, because we have the formulas now.
Yeah. Okay, on to one. I said there wasn't a golden nugget, but there is one that I do want council to be aware of. So one of the things that we had them look at was a potential new street lighting fee. Currently, the city pays about $850,000 a year related to streetlights provided throughout the city. We pay Excel. I mentioned earlier that they're replacing some of the streetlights throughout the city, and so that's an additional cost there. So we did have them look at the number of residential and commercial properties in the city of Littleton and compare that to the annual cost over the last 5 years related to the street lighting. And they did suggest that if we wanted to implement this, that they were recommending a $3.75 month fee, and so this would come out to about $45 a year. It's a potential revenue of $850,000, and what this could potentially do is help offset costs in the general fund. We currently pay all of this out of the general fund, and so if we assess this fee, then we could free up about $850,000 in the general fund that could be used elsewhere. One of the things that we might look at is maybe addressing some of our capital issues related to the fleet fund. We've talked about creating a fleet fund, and this might provide a mechanism for us to do that. I think,
Wait.
I've never heard of this.
I've never heard of a street lighting fee before, and well, what do our neighbors do? What does Denver do? I mean, do they have a fee on there?
There are
I mean,
some
it seems
that-
like that should be the cost
Right.
of doing business.
there are some organizations or districts that do charge a street lighting fee. Highlands Ranch is one for certain, I live there, so I know I get that monthly from the Highlands Ranch Metro District, so they provide a fee. They have a little bit of different structure. This was a flat rate is what they were recommending. I believe, is it Thornton or
There's several in the front range.
yeah, Thornton is also another one that I believe charges a streetlight fee as well. Centennial,
Centennial's normally.
So the
It's a very
customer
common
is the
practice.
resident.
yes,
Well, property.
or property owner actually, property owner, yes.
Not a renter, not a renter.
I'm not interested in this.
That would be built into the rent.
Could we file liens if they didn't pay that
We
fee?
that conversation a little deeper.
Yes, absolutely. This, we just wanted to bring this forward and have you just kind of think about it. And if council is interested, we would absolutely bring more information forward at a future study session or actually during the preparation of the 2021 budget is when we thought we might potentially look at this.
We would pay this when we do our property taxes?
No, so one of the things that we would probably tie this to is our annual sewer billing that we do. If we look at changing the frequency of that, we would incorporate this fee with that sewer bill because we already have the records there.
How could that impact how could it impact lower income families?
Well, based on this, it would be an additional $45 a year, so it could have an impact on every, property owner throughout the city of Littleton. So I think that's why it would absolutely warrant an additional conversation related to that.
I'm not interested in pursuing this, again, I feel like we're nickel and diming our citizens on something like this. And when we talk about where our big investments need to be in streets, this is, I think to quote Mark, is like a drop in the bucket. So that's not gonna address our road and infrastructure. So I don't know, I just don't feel like this is the right thing for our city.
I'd be interested in learning more, because I don't know what our cost is. So I don't know how that offsets, and $850,000 is a substantial amount that we could, so I'd be interested in learning more.
Where are you on this?
I would like to hear more about it. I haven't heard of it before, but I like the number 850,000.
And my position is that we have been so low on our fees across the board. Why I don't like adding $45 to somebody's house, but we've gotta do something. So yeah, I think more information is good. Scott, what do you think?
I'm always open to learning more information. I think for now, I'm leaning pretty solidly against this. This seems like a core function of government that ought to come out of the general fund. Just like we don't have a separate sort of police department fee, right? This implicates safety. And I think it's fine with me, it comes out of the general fund. Our general fund's in pretty good shape right now. It seems like a major policy decision. I mean, $850, that's real money, or $850,000, that's real money. And with conversation we've been having about a sales tax increase potentially, I think this kind of money deserves citizen input, voter input.
I'm leaning not to supporting it. It's like $375 this month, and then next year we do something, and all of a sudden we're kind of, it seems, for lack of a better term, sneaky. Just to kind of sneak these little fees in when people don't know about them. When you have a building permit, the fee goes from this to this, people are very well aware, but all of a sudden something's gone up, I don't understand. I'd be open to more information.
I'm open to more. I like the $850,000.
So what I hear, both you two at least said more information, so it sounds like just more information.
Maybe, how often have we done something like this? Are we gonna do more?
This would be a brand new fee.
Hasn't been on here much, but it's done a lot elsewhere.
Yeah.
Having worked with communities to develop transportation maintenance fees, parks and trails maintenance fees that are charged on monthly utility bills. You know, if you look at it this way, if we're paying $1 million basically right now for streetlights that we don't have any control over. And so in this particular case, that's $1 million that doesn't come out of the general fund, that comes from another source. So you're freeing up $1 million for other services or programs you might want to invest in.
Scott?
Part of the information that I would want is our sort of fee portfolio right now. I don't think sort of one potential fee in isolation tells us as a council a lot. I think, and similarly, it doesn't really matter to me what our neighbors are doing, right? What matters to me is all of our fees considered together, what's the financial burden on the citizens?
And bring back some reports again. I think for most of the folks here that are new, they're unfamiliar with our fee structure and how bad we are not collecting. Whereas other jurisdictions are not, we are not good at collecting fees.
Yeah.
And so I think it might be good for folks to have information on that.
Okay, sure.
That's a good point.
All right, so the last section is staff's recommendation is to change the noted fees. That was the film permit, the sewer and storm drainage, the certification, and the rental property. And then also we'd like to adjust the building department and development fees after the International Building Code is updated. And then I have direction on the potential of adding the street lighting fee.
Any more questions?
Just one more comment on the additional information, as Scott mentioned, just kind of give the whole portfolio of fees. Can you also show it over history to kind of show how they've changed or increased maybe over the past, I don't know, pick a number, 10 years or something like that? What's that?
I'm sure most of them are flat.
They are.
That's fine,
Yeah.
that's fine. It's just more to understand the impact that a citizen would experience as a result.
So in terms of information, where we're kind of over or under, maybe not so much in comparison, but in terms of what it really costs us. Or what kind of monies are we paying out that we're not recovering or something?
Well, several years ago, I was saying we need to charge 100% of whatever it costs us, and that's very difficult for us. That's what this study's all about, if I'm not mistaken. So as much as it would be nice to have 100%, and I've been all for that, it's just not gonna be practical probably.
But closer, so there's less of a disparity is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
I mean, at least 50%, I mean, we're inching our way up a little bit, Scott.
Is there any way we could see a proposal for a differentiated fee structure, depending on whether it's single family, multifamily, or commercial? Because my understanding is users across the board would just be charged that one rate, and that doesn't seem proportionate, right? If you're using way more street lighting.
Yeah, we can do that, we can look at that. Since we have the information internally now, we would just have to apply some different methods.
Anything else?
Time for bed.
There's nothing, Mark, you have anything to wrap up? City Attorney? We are adjourned.